I'm sure everyone saw this coming, but we are finally here. The number one team is, of course, the Super Bowl champion Scranton Squirrels, and we're going to kick things right off with this team comparison. Went with the Kansas City Chiefs, pretty self-explanatory. Have a franchise quarterback, have a great team surrounding him, have great offensive playmakers, and are building a dynasty. Now, most valuable player, of course, Liam Ryan, was the MVP of the league. He better be MVP of his own team. Now we move on to Offensive Player of the Year. We have Jaheira Seals, who was second in the league in rushing touchdowns, had around 300 rushing yards, and led the league in passing yards. Also did not commit a single turnover. Now we move on to Defensive Player of the Year. I went ahead and gave it to Brandon Braithwaite, I think simply because he led the league in interceptions, was also a consistent defender for them, had a lot of tackles, was also very reliable on defense. As we move on to the ratings, the offense is a 98. I went ahead and gave them one lower than Georgia. Now I think that there's a debate to be made there, but I would give Georgia the edge personally. Defense is a 95. Great defense, so much depth, and they just got it all figured out on both sides of the ball. Now, for coaching, I gave them a 92. They don't have a head coach. Their team chemistry is just so good that they don't need it. I think that even is better than having a coach. And overall, I'm going to go ahead and give them a 95. Tied with Georgia, I think we saw that they're a very evenly matched couple teams, so they have the same ratings. Now, onto the left side of your screen, we're going to talk about that defense first. Gave them all A's across the board, just so versatile. The only thing stopping them from having all A pluses is that they only really have two corners. As we move into 4-on-4, I'll be curious to see what they do. They do have a lot of depth, but the quality isn't quite up there with Braithwaite and Ryan at corner. Now, onto offense. All A's except for an A+ at tight end. This is just an amazing offense, so well-rounded. They have the best tight end in the league in Luke Vaughn. The only reason that they're not all A+ is because Jaheira Seals is, I think, the second best quarterback in the league. I would give the edge to Matt Blair, and seeing as there's not a lot of quarterbacks in the league, there's some discrepancy there between A and A+. And then with the A's at running back and wide receiver, I just didn't want to give them an A+ at either one because I think that their offense is just really versatile and doesn't really lean in one direction like that. And we move on here to the players, and who else to start it off with but the MVP, Liam Ryan. Not even going to talk about the ratings. It's all pretty self-explanatory. 99 both sides of the ball. Player comparison on offense, I went with Justin Jefferson. I just think he's so versatile, and they're both the best wide receiver in their respective leagues. Cornerback, I went with Denzel Ward just because of the athleticism. Next up here is the quarterback, Jaheira Seals. Went ahead and gave him a Lamar Jackson player comparison, which I feel is very fair. Much like Lamar Jackson is so good on the run, but he kind of limits his scrambling because of his injury history, which is the same case with Lamar. I know he has a couple ACL injuries in his history, which is why he doesn't run the ball as much, despite how effective he is with it. He had 12 carries, 9 of them were touchdowns. If you're running the ball and 75% of the time it's a touchdown, that is insane. Went ahead and gave him a 94 overall. I know there was definitely some flack from Scranton for not giving him MVP consideration. However, I just tend to lean towards the versatility. I think that in order to win MVP in a flag football league, you need to play both sides of the ball. And I do feel bad because he can't really play both sides of the ball with those injury concerns. However, it is what it is. And I would like to note some of his numbers. Led the league in touchdowns, led the league in passing yards, and did not commit a single turnover. We have Brandon Braithwaite here, who I think fits perfectly with a Deebo Samuel player comparison. He can do so much for this offense. So versatile, so good in the run game, and so good as a receiver, which is why I think he warrants that Deebo Samuel player comparison. And on defense, I went with Xavier Howard, just lockdown corner. Gets a lot of interceptions, really tight coverage. And now on to Luke Vaughn, who I think is the best tight end in the league when you consider true tight ends. Is so reminiscent of Rob Gronkowski, can just really do everything. So good at catching in traffic, really good hands, strong, good blocker. The only thing he really lacks on the rating side of things is speed, but I didn't really take that into account. He is a 92 overall tight end. And moving on to the defensive side of the ball, I went ahead and gave him a TJ Watt player comparison. Just so good as a pass rusher. He's got such a long wingspan that it's so hard to get around him. And overall, that's what makes him such a good tackler and such a good pass rusher. Moving on to Trevor Carr, who is not going to be on the Scranton roster for the upcoming season as far as I know, but did play for them during the season. I went ahead and gave him a Jalen Hyatt player comparison on offense, which some people might think is an insult, but if you know me, you know that it's not. I love Jalen Hyatt, one of my favorite players, if not my favorite. I think they're just really similar in the fact that they're better down the field, both incredibly fast, and both haven't really shown a lot in the league yet, but we know how good they are. And same thing on defense, went with CJ Henderson, who was a top pick a few years back and hasn't really panned out in the league, but it's just the fact that we haven't seen much out of him. And I think that we could if he were to come back, but I don't think that's going to happen. Moving on here, a similar story. We've got Nate Tim, who only played in a few games before. I think he tore his hamstring or something along those lines. Definitely get better soon. His player comparison on offense is going to be Tyler Boyd. From what I saw, I just think they play really similarly. Solid route runners, sure-handed, just kind of like a good wide receiver 3. Now, moving on to the defensive side of the ball is where he really shined. He was an 85 overall, gave him Kenny Moore as a player comparison. Overall, just played really good coverage. He was batting plenty of balls away, got a really nice interception, and was pretty good at stopping them in the run game. Moving on to Ryan Glennon here. This is just a team with a lot of depth pieces centered around some amazing playmakers. And Ryan Glennon, just kind of similar to Nate Tim in the way that he is really a well-rounded route runner, not particularly amazing in that department, but he's really sure-handed, pretty athletic, good hands. That's why I gave him Jerry Jeudy as a player comparison. Definitely has some potential if we see more out of him. Steven Nelson on defense, I think that he was better on defense than offense. Pretty solid coverage, and overall, I think a pretty solid depth piece for this Super Bowl team. Another player here for Scranton, Patrick Bruno. This is just crazy how many players they cycled in and out, and they still went on to win a Super Bowl. Just a little tidbit there. I think that that's pretty impressive. Anyway, Patrick Bruno, give him a Rondell Moore player comparison. I think he's just a well-rounded route runner, pretty quick, good hands. Just overall, I think that he's just a pretty solid all-around wide receiver. Defensively, I'm giving him an Alontae Taylor player comparison. Just solid coverage, really similar to the last few players. He's just a great depth piece. There's no weakness in his game. He's just all-around pretty talented. And finally here, rounding it out, is the man who led the first couple weeks in touchdowns and receiving yards. Later in the year, he wasn't playing as much, but I gave him a Zay Flowers player comparison just because he was just one of the more surprising players. I think that Zay Flowers was a pretty surprising rookie to come onto the scene and have such a good year. Definitely both are very athletic, which is why I went with Zay Flowers in particular versus some of the other rookie wide receivers. And then on defense, I went ahead and gave him Jalen Petrie. He could be like a good nickel corner in the BFL next year if he returns. We'll see how things play out, but I know that the analogy doesn't really work with nickel, but I'm just kind of talking like cornerback 3. I think that that could definitely be a very good role that he excels in. Congratulations once again to the Super Bowl champion Scranton Squirrels. Thank you for listening, and go ahead and subscribe because we've got the season right around the corner.